This is the story of a man who was convicted of attempting to steal hedge clippers. And for that crime, he was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Let's talk about institutional racism in American law. My name is Nate the Lawyer, and welcome to The Firm. If you're new here, don't forget to like this video, share this video, and subscribe to this channel if you like what you hear. Let's talk about Fair Wayne Bryant. He was convicted and given a life sentence in 1997 for attempting to steal hedge clippers. Now, Bryant had a criminal past. In 1979, his only violent offense, he was arrested for attempted armed robbery, which he served 10 years in state prison for. Hard labor. In 1987, he was also arrested and convicted for possession of stolen property. In 1989, he had forged a check and was arrested for that crime. In 1992, he was convicted of burglary. And in 1997, he was convicted of attempting to steal the hedge clippers. Now, in Louisiana, they have what are known as habitual offender laws. Now, a good example of this is the 3-strike rule. In California, if you get 3 felonies, then your 3rd felony conviction, you get a life sentence. There are some facts that I need to tell you about. The first fact I need to tell you is that 36% of the population in Louisiana is black. But 80% of the people incarcerated under these habitual offender laws happen to be black. So Mr. Bryant, who is black, is now serving a life sentence and has already served 23 years of this life sentence for stealing the hedge clippers. Now, Mr. Bryant, he appealed his conviction after 23 years. And he's asking the Supreme Court of Louisiana to overturn his conviction because he's saying that it's cruel and unusual punishment. But the Supreme Court of Louisiana denied his request. Now, in denying his request, the court was almost unanimous, except for one dissenting justice. And it happened to be the Chief Justice. Now, the Chief Justice of the Louisiana Supreme Court happens to be a black woman, the first black woman in the history of the court to serve in that role. Her name is Bernadette Johnson, and she was the lone dissenting voice on the Louisiana Supreme Court. And she makes what I believe is the most compelling argument that these habitual offender laws are examples of institutional racism that still exist within the criminal justice system of Louisiana and even of our country. The Chief Justice goes into the history of this law and how this law was specifically designed to re-enslave black people after the Civil War. Now, to understand this better, we have to go on a little tangent here. So I have to give you a history lesson of how this law was developed so you can understand the Chief Justice's objection to this conviction. As any grade school child is going to tell you, the Civil War was about slavery. And after the Civil War, the 13th Amendment was passed that freed the slaves. The 13th Amendment ended slavery, but it didn't end racism, nor did it even end slavery. Think about this. After the 13th Amendment was ratified, you had 4.4 million African Americans who are now free. They were illiterate because it was illegal to teach them how to read or write. They had no money and no property. If you look at this map, the highlighted part is called the Black Belt. After the Civil War, 97 to 98% of all black people in the United States lived in this highlighted portion. This is named the Black Belt. Now, the reason why the majority of the African American population lived here is that this is the fertile soil. This is where your plantations were. This is where your agricultural centers were. 4.4 million people. So after the Civil War, the South lost its greatest resource, free labor. Think about this. If you own a business, your biggest cost is labor. It's more than half the cost of your overhead. The Southern economy would effectively have been destroyed if you couldn't have free labor. The prices of goods would rise, and your profits would be cut tremendously because you don't have free labor. The South needed to figure out a way to keep the black population enslaved, working for free, but it be lawful. Now, in the passage of the 13th Amendment, there was one notable exception, and what I call the crime exception. You could be enslaved, white, black, whoever, if you had due process, and if you were convicted of a crime, you could then be re-enslaved. What do you think the southern states did? Well, they passed laws making it illegal. Get this, illegal to be black. It was illegal to be black. Here are some of the offenses that you could be arrested, convicted, and sent to jail for. But jail was obviously going to work on the plantation. For years of your life, if you were caught doing one of these things, if you were caught being unemployed, if you were caught assembling with other black people, if you were buying any type of alcohol, carrying any type of weapon. They also passed a black tax that they know most black people could not pay. Also, if you stole cotton, that could be a capital offense, so you could be killed for that. If you quit your job, that made you unemployed, so quitting your job was illegal. If a white person was to come by your house and saw it was disorderly, you and your family could be arrested and sent to jail or to the plantation. And obviously, reading or writing was a criminal offense for black people, so they would send you to the plantation. Now, think about this. The South was so horrible that they criminalized entire families. We're talking about fathers, mothers, and their children. Their children were criminalized. Here's a picture of African-American children on a plantation. And again, these are convicted criminals. Look at that. Cops would go, and if they saw a black child on the street, they would arrest them and send them to the plantation to work off their crimes. That's paying their debt to society. Children. The federal government said, well, hold on, this is ridiculous, right? It's ridiculous to have people enslaved again in these states. So what did they do? Well, the federal government passed the 14th Amendment, equal protection under the law. So you couldn't have these laws that just applied to black people. The laws had to apply equally to all. So what do you think the South did? Well, they removed all of the caveats to the law. So for instance, now instead of being black and unemployed for you to be a criminal, you just had to be unemployed. And what would happen is that police officers and law enforcement would just arrest black people for being unemployed. But if you were white and unemployed, you didn't have a problem. If you were white and bought liquor, you didn't have a problem. It was just for black people. And the same with black children. Again, look at these black children. They were in prison jumpsuits. During the 1920s, there was a great migration of African Americans. Remember, 98% of them were in the South. There were opportunities in the North, and they started leaving en masse. Right? They were like, we're out of here. You know, these black codes and the Jim Crow South, we need to get out of here. What do you think the southern states did? Well, at this time, they understood that if you lock someone up for being unemployed, eventually they would serve their time and get out and leave. So they started doing very interesting things. First, they passed these habitual offender laws. So if you were caught multiple times being unemployed, then after maybe the third or fourth time, you would get a life sentence without the possibility of parole. You would be a slave for life. If you were black and you got caught being unemployed and they took you to the plantation and you worked for a year, and then that day that you're supposed to get out, they'd have a whole bunch of you, right? They'd get 10 of you. All right, you guys are going to be free today. You know, you guys have served your time. They would take you, put you right out in front of the plantation, and guess who would be there? It would be a whole bunch of police officers. They would stop you and say, where are you going? I said, well, I'm going home. We just finished our time at the plantation. Well, do you have a job? Well, no, I don't have a job. We just got out of jail. Oh, unfortunately, it's illegal to be unemployed in this state. So you're under arrest for being unemployed. You're like, well, hold on. We just got out of. No. You're unemployed. We're arresting you again for being unemployed. And they would do that 3 or 4 times. And then the last time they would say, well, you're a habitual offender. You can't keep a job. And they would enslave you for the rest of your life. Same with children, same with women. That's what the habitual offender laws were meant to do. Obviously, 100% of the people who were convicted as habitual offenders were black, because that's what it was meant to do. Those laws were meant on purpose to re-enslave African Americans. That's it. Fast forward 100 years later, 2020. Those laws, those habitual offender laws, are still in the books. Now, instead of 100% of black people being victims of this law, it's now 80%. Now, the Chief Justice makes the point that, hey, hold on. These laws were meant to enslave black people. They've always been meant to do this. And this Hedge clipper case is a perfect example of it. This man has served 23 years in prison for attempting, not even stealing, attempting to steal hedge clippers. And they upheld that conviction. They upheld that conviction. Again, these laws were meant to take petty crimes and make you a lifetime participant in the criminal justice system. Now, this is so outrageous. I want you to think about one last thing. The Louisiana State Penitentiary, where Mr. Bryant is serving his life sentence for attempting to steal clippers. Where do you think it's built upon? The state penitentiaries were built on plantations. Why? Because they wanted the free labor. They weren't sending them to prisons. They were sending them back to plantations. So what do you think? Do you think I'm out of the box? Do you think the Chief Justice is wrong? Do you think that she's just out of her mind? She's seeing racism where there is none? Do you think the fact that 80% of the people who are being convicted under this law are black, while only 36% of the population is black, do you think that makes sense? Do you think that we've come far in race relations? Because now, instead of 100%, it's just 80%. This is what institutional racism in the American justice system looks like. It's not pretty. It's not some fantasy that's on the street. It's real. They enslaved children. They enslaved women. They enslaved fathers. And it's still happening today. My name is Nate. If you like what you just heard, hit the subscribe button, because we're going to continue to talk about this. My name is Nate, lawyer, YouTuber. I'm going to check you next time. Peace.